It's been an all-around great time to be a Spider-Man fan. Even the people who aren't huge fans of Tom Holland's version of the character were hyped to see Spider-Man No Way Home. All the reception has been all high praise for the most part. The film isn't perfect by any means, but it's a damn good time. Yes, there's a ton of fan service, but I don't care. Yes, there's a lot of winks and nods that don't add to the movie in any way, but I don't care. And yes, me along with the rest of the world predicted 2 years ago that Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire would be in this movie. It was literally the worst kept secret in Hollywood, but I don't care. I still cheered like I was at a Lakers game when they came through their portals. This wasn't supposed to be the greatest movie of all time. It was made to be the event of the year, and it accomplished that goal. But this isn't a movie review, y'all. I just want to touch on something that really touched my soul during and after this movie, and that's Andrew Garfield's redemption. So let's get right into it. To talk about Andrew Garfield's redemption, we gotta briefly go back to the beginning of where it all started with the Spider-Man live action movies. No, not all the way back to 77, I'm talking about 2002. So it's 2002 and Sony takes a director mainly known for his work in the horror genre by Sam Raimi, and an aging actor who's had some good performances but hasn't really had his big break yet. And yes, I'm talking the man, the myth, the legend, Tobey Maguire. So obviously they make that Spider-Man movie, which is a gem, and it completely revamps the genre of superhero films. It hadn't seemed to be too much hype around this type of movie since Batman Returns. This movie was super successful, breaking all kind of box office records, grossing $400 million domestically and about $788 million worldwide. And they're a studio that has to make money, so of course with a movie that successful, we gotta get a sequel. Spidey fans all over the world were fiending for this movie, but as far as the average civilian goes, most people always expect the sequel to be worse than his predecessor. But they were sadly mistaken, man. This one was better than the first one. It made around the same domestically and then $796 million worldwide. And to a lot of people, they don't just consider this the best Spider-Man movie ever made, but they consider it the best comic book movie ever made. So then they ride the coattails of the first two successful films and make a third one. And off of hype alone, this movie sold more than them both. This Spider-Man was the highest boxing movie of 2007 domestically with $336 million and a whopping $895 million worldwide, only coming in third place to Pirates of the Caribbean and Harry Potter. But even though Spider-Man 3 made more than the other two, it was not as well critically received by critics or the audiences. We all know the story about Sam Raimi not wanting to work with the character of Venom, but Sony forcing him to use the character anyway. If you don't, I talk about it a little bit briefly in my video where I ranked all the live action Spider-Man movies. Feel free to check that out because that's not what this video is about. But regardless of its poor reception, it didn't turn people completely off. It was a lot of people really wanting to see Spider-Man 4. They wanted to see where Peter would go, and they wanted to see what he had learned from his experiences. And to most people's knowledge, we were going to get a Spider-Man 4. But then a year went by and, no news. Then another year went by. No new trailer, no new news. And you hear about a lot of background drama going on behind the scenes. Most people eventually gave up on the idea and just figured we would never get another Spider-Man 4 and would just have to accept that Spider-Man 3 was the finale. Then you fast forward a couple of years to 2011 and we get a new Spider-Man trailer. This trailer comes out revealing that it's not only a reboot, but they also recasted Tobey Maguire for Andrew Garfield. There was a lot of mixed feelings about this. There was a lot of Spidey fans who were excited for this to happen, but there were a lot of people in the general audience who had got so accustomed to Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man and that version of the character that they wanted nothing to do with this new franchise of Spider-Man. I know people to this day who still haven't seen it because it looks so tonally different from the Raimi series. On top of that, the MCU was already alive and kicking 4 years strong. The first Avengers movie was coming out, as well as the third installment to the Nolan Batman trilogy. And then here comes this random Spider-Man reboot that nobody really asked for. So long story short, no matter how good this movie was or could have been, it still would have been poorly received by the main audience. At least that's what we thought. Even though it sold significantly less than the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie domestically, it still cracked the top 6 grossing films worldwide that year. It made $758 million worldwide on a budget of $230 million, so that's a pretty damn successful movie. And with success, definitely comes a sequel. This darker and more grounded in reality tone really worked for the younger audiences. A lot of people were starting to warm up to the idea of this new, snarkier version of Peter Parker and Spider-Man, which honestly, in my opinion, is a little more closer to comic book accurate. It wasn't as highly praised as the OG series, but people were very interested in this sequel. So after making all that money from the first one, a year later, the new Amazing Spider-Man 2 trailer comes out. And this shit looks amazing, y'all. Batman and Spider-Man are my two favorite superheroes. Batman is my number 1, Spider-Man is my number 2. And I was way more excited to see The Amazing Spider-Man 2 than I was to see The Dark Knight Rises. But the movie we thought that we were getting from the trailer wasn't really the movie we got in the theater experience, and a lot of fans felt super misled from that. There's so much cut from this movie that you can make a full movie just off of the deleted scenes. They did a lot of setting up to a larger world, so much so that it took away from the main storyline. There were about 5 or 6 different plot lines happening at once in this movie, so even though it had moments of greatness, it was still a little too messy. Naturally, critic and audience scores dropped tremendously. It was a clear step down from the first film. But regardless of the negative reception of the second movie, the series as a whole still had a lot of promise. If you shovel through a lot of the mess and clutter, there is a really good story to be told underneath somewhere on the cutting floor. And people were still really interested in the third movie because the idea of a broken Peter Parker struggling to come to terms with his failure, struggling to forgive himself for putting Gwen in harm's way, could have really made a great ending to a trilogy, but Sony ended up pulling the plug and obviously eventually letting the MCU introduce a new version in Tom Holland. So not only did Andrew Spider-Man fail to save Gwen in his movie, but in real life we were robbed of seeing the next step of this character's progression. So now let's fast forward to 2021 and everybody who is a Spider-Man fan is anticipating Spider-Man No Way Home. At this point, it's no secret that Andrew and Tobey are going to be in this movie, so people were just really hyped from all generations of Spidey fans. I was just hoping that when they introduced these guys that it really meant something to the story and it wasn't just empty fan service trying to play on our nostalgia. And y'all, they really delivered. The theater erupted when those portals opened, man. I love how Tobey played his version of the character. He played him without missing a beat, and that made the kid in me super happy. But Andrew, not only did he not miss a beat, but he actually elevated his version. They added these extra layers of subtle nuance to his previous works. Like, man, the look on his face when he saved MJ says it all. You could tell he'd been holding that pain in for a long time, and that was a super emotional moment. Honestly, if I wasn't there with my lady, I might have shed a few tears. But for me, the one that almost broke me was way more subtle than that. It was that stoic longing for love look that he has on his face when seeing Tom's Peter and MJ having a moment. The camera just lingers on his face for a little bit, like damn, you can tell he really misses Gwen and really still lets that moment haunt him and hang over his head. You can tell this even more so in the initial scene where they meet Tom's Peter. He tells the other Peters that he got angry and bitter and he stopped pulling his punches. That one line says so much and brings up so many questions, like, I stopped pulling my punches, like what does that mean? Did he become less compassionate? Did he start just beating people to a pulp, or did he maybe even cross that line and actually, take a life? Not indirectly like Tobey Spider-Man did in the first Spider-Man, but actually kill someone. It sounds like things got really dark for this version of Peter Parker, and that really makes sense. A lot of people really relate to and love Peter Parker because he represents the best in us, but he also represents the worst in us. He doesn't always make the right decision, but he always makes the human one. So after all that loss and realizing a lot of it was your own fault, I think the best of us could fall down that type of path of darkness. The biggest tell of the character's state of mind is shown perfectly when we're introduced to him. Just look at the difference between the way Andrew's Peter and Tobey's Peter are introduced. Andrew shows up dressed head to toe in his full Spider-Man suit, compared to Tobey who's in his regular clothes with his Spider-Man suit underneath. MJ asks Andrew's Peter for his ID. He tells her that he doesn't have it and it's the MCU, so of course it's played off like a joke. Everyone in the theater then erupted in laughter in that moment, but I didn't. I can see the underlying sadness. This Peter is so lost in being Spider-Man that he doesn't even care to keep his ID on him. There is no Peter Parker, there is no girlfriend, there is no shot at love, there are no friends. And most importantly, there is nothing that even resembles a personal life. He lives in complete emotional isolation. His life is being Spider-Man. That's some dark shit and it's almost Batman-like. Pretty much just turning to the suit to deal with his trauma instead of actually stopping to feel and face it head on. Like, man, that just makes me want The Amazing Spider-Man 3 so much. And apparently I'm not alone, because Make TASM 3 has been trending on Twitter ever since No Way Home came out. It's really clear that Andrew stole the show for a lot of people. But even if TASM 3 never happens, and this is the last time we see this version of the character on screen, I still think it was a great send-off and a redemption arc for him. It's really been amazing to see the outpour of love that this version of Peter Parker has been getting, because it's well deserved. Andrew clearly loves Spidey because it bleeds through every single performance he's given as the character. Look, man, Garfield Spider-Man may not have the best overall movies, he may not have a complete trilogy, and he may not have all the fancy gadgets. He may not have fought an alien made out of black goo, but in my eyes, Andrew Garfield is the best Spider-Man.
Stan Lee says, that the reason why Spidey is so popular is because all of us can relate to him, and I agree. I needed Spidey in my life when I was a kid, and he gave me hope. In every comic I read, he was living out mine and every skinny boy's fantasy of being stronger, of being free of the body I was born into, and that swinging sensation of flight. And upon receiving his power, unlike most who become corrupted, he used it for good. And I think we all wish that we had the courage to stick up for ourselves more, to stick up for a loved one more, or even a stranger you see being mistreated. And Peter Parker has inspired me to feel stronger. He made me, Andrew, braver. He reassured me that by doing the right thing, it's worth it. It's worth the struggle. It's worth the pain. It's worth even the tears, the bruises, and the blood. And I wouldn't be able to stand here in front of you guys right now without feeling that Spider-Man was here with me, with his reassuring hand on my shoulder, making sure I don't fall over and concuss myself.
Yo, if you got to the end of this video, I appreciate y'all for watching the whole thing. I'm assuming you like it if you stayed to the end. Also, let me know down in the comments, who is your favorite Spider-Man? I personally love all 3 live action versions of Spider-Man for different reasons, man. The first Spider-Man series came out when I was a kid, and that first Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire was just so like whimsical and eye-opening for me, and it just was one of those experiences that as a kid I just enjoyed wholeheartedly. But then you fast forward 2 years later, and my whole entire life changed in that 2 years. My stepdad had passed, which sent my mom down a spiral of drugs and alcohol, and we immediately fell from upper middle class to dirt poor. So just seeing Peter go through all that in Spider-Man 2 really helped me get through that time. So that version of Spider-Man has a really dope place in my heart. But then you fast forward to Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, and not only is a drastic change from that version, but it's also a drastic change for me. I'm going off into college on my first year in 2011. I'm 8 hours away from home. So just being able to dive into this more realistic, seemingly obtainable, even though nobody in real life can obtain these powers, seemingly obtainable thing with this more grounded take in this also kind of fantastical heightened reality world was just an amazing experience for me. So that series sticks out for me in those reasons as well. And then you fast forward all these years into the Tom Holland's version of the character, and now ready to start a new life as an adult and going out into the real world. So that version of the character means a lot to me as well. I had that character through that transitional time in my life. It's just kind of one of those synergy things that have happened where literally a new Spider-Man series was coming out at every transitional stage in my life. So they really all mean a lot to me, and he really is one of my favorite characters of all time, next to Batman, of course. But anyway, sorry to get so sentimental, y'all. I just wanted to tell you why I even made this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you like, subscribe, drop your favorite Spider-Man down in the comments. Here's some more video essays that I've done on different comic book movies and TV shows. It's your boy Eddie Knight. I'm out.